She stood on the auction block at 7 years old, watching her mother dragged away screaming, sold to a plantation 300 miles south. That image burned into her memory like a brand. The crack of the whip, the iron shackles, the smell of blood mixing with dirt under the merciless sun. This is the story of how a child born into chains became the most powerful voice of a generation, how suffering transformed into art, and how one woman's revenge shook the foundations of an entire system that tried to break her. What you're about to hear is a journey from the cotton fields to the world's greatest stages, a tale of survival, reinvention, and a reckoning that nobody saw coming. The plantation stretched endlessly across the Mississippi Delta, rows upon rows of cotton plants that swayed like white ghosts in the humid breeze. She was born in a cramped wooden cabin with gaps in the walls where winter wind cut through like knives. Her mother sang while working, old spirituals passed down through generations, songs that held coded messages of hope and escape. Those melodies were her first language, learned before she could even walk. Her father had been sold before she was born. She never knew his face, only the stories her mother whispered late at night about a man with strong hands and a gentle heart who dared to learn to read and paid for it with his life. The overseer was a man named Thornton, built like a bull with eyes that held no mercy. He represented something bigger than himself, a cog in a machine designed to extract labor and crush spirits. Behind him stood the plantation owner, Edmund Caldwell, a man who attended church every Sunday and quoted scripture while counting his human property like livestock. The Caldwell family had built their fortune on generations of enslaved labor, each brick in their mansion representing broken backs and stolen lives. Young Caldwell, Edmund's son, would sometimes watch from the big house veranda, learning the family business, inheriting not just wealth, but a legacy of cruelty disguised as economics. She learned early that survival meant invisibility. Keep your head down, work fast, never meet their eyes. Her mother taught her this along with the songs. Music became her refuge, the one place where her mind could escape even when her body couldn't. In the fields, she hummed quietly, letting the rhythm match her movements, transforming torture into something bearable. At night in the cabin, voices would blend together in harmonies that spoke of a freedom they'd never known, a promised land that existed only in faith and melody. She absorbed every note, every inflection, every emotional nuance. Her voice developed power even in childhood, rich and haunting, carrying pain and hope in equal measure. Before we continue with this incredible journey, I want to ask you something. If this story is touching you, if you want to see more content that brings untold histories to light, please hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a like on this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Your support helps us create more stories that matter. Now, let's continue. The breaking point came on a sweltering July afternoon when she was 15. Her mother had grown weak from years of labor and malnourishment, her hands twisted with arthritis, unable to pick cotton as fast as Thornton demanded. He decided to make an example. The entire enslaved population was forced to watch as he tied her mother to the whipping post in the center of the compound, 20 lashes for insufficient work. She watched her mother's back split open, blood running down into the dirt, and something inside her shattered and reformed simultaneously. That night, her mother died in her arms, her last words a whispered song about crossing over to freedom. In that moment, staring at her mother's lifeless face, she made a decision. She would not die here. She would not let them have the satisfaction. She would escape, and somehow, someday, she would make them pay for every drop of blood spilled on this cursed ground. Planning an escape required intelligence, patience, and allies. She began carefully, listening to conversations between the house servants who had more access to information. She learned that there was a network, whispered about in coded language, People who helped the enslaved reach free states. The Underground Railroad. It sounded mythical, but she had to believe it was real. She connected with an older man named Samuel who had been plotting his own escape for years. He knew the routes, the safe houses, the methods. They would need to wait for the new moon, when darkness was absolute. They would need supplies, stolen bit by bit over weeks. She also found an unexpected ally in the Caldwell's youngest daughter, Margaret, a girl her own age who had grown up seeing the horror around her and could no longer stomach the hypocrisy. Margaret agreed to leave the kitchen door unlocked and provide food for the journey. The risk was enormous. If caught, death would be merciful compared to what Thornton would do. The night they ran, her heart hammered so hard she thought it would burst through her chest. 4 of them total, moving through the darkness like shadows, every snapped twig sounding like a gunshot. They traveled by night, hid by day, following the North Star and Samuel's knowledge of the land. Dogs barked in the distance. Twice they heard search parties and had to wade through freezing creek water for hours to throw off the scent. Hunger gnawed at them. Fear was constant. But so was determination. After 3 weeks of running, they reached a Quaker safe house in Pennsylvania, a modest farmhouse where an elderly couple fed them hot soup and treated them like human beings for the first time in their lives. She cried that night, overwhelmed by the simple act of kindness, by the realization that she was no longer property. She was free. Philadelphia in 1857 was a revelation and a disappointment simultaneously. Freedom was legal, but racism was everywhere. She arrived with nothing, no money, no connections, no education beyond what songs her mother taught her. The city was vast and confusing, full of people moving with purpose she didn't understand. She found work as a washerwoman, scrubbing clothes for white families, the irony not lost on her that even in freedom she was still serving them. But Philadelphia also had something the plantation never did: opportunities. There were black churches with choirs, small theaters where performers of all races occasionally shared stages, music halls where she could hear sounds she'd never imagined. She spent every spare moment near these places, listening, learning, absorbing. Her voice had matured, deepened, gained a quality that made people stop and turn when she sang, even just humming while working. One evening she was singing to herself while walking home, a spiritual mixed with something she'd heard from an Italian opera singer performing on the street. A man named Isaiah Freeman heard her and stopped dead in his tracks. He was a free black man who managed a small music venue that catered to mixed audiences, always walking the tightrope of what white patrons would tolerate. He offered her an audition. She was terrified. She had never performed for strangers, never stood on a stage. But something in his eyes, a recognition of her talent and her pain, made her say yes. That audition changed everything. When she opened her mouth and let her voice fill that small room, grown men wept. Isaiah immediately offered her a position in his shows, starting as background, eventually working towards solo performances. The transformation into who she would become started with a name. She couldn't use her real name, the one given by the Caldwell family, the name that tied her to enslavement. She needed something that represented who she was becoming. Powerful, untouchable. She remembered a story her mother once told about an African queen who ruled her people with wisdom and strength. She combined that with a word she'd learned meant goddess in another language. The name she chose was deliberately grand, deliberately dramatic. It was armor and weapon simultaneously. She designed a stage persona that was everything she'd been denied. Draped in rich fabrics, adorned with jewels, standing tall and proud. When she performed, she wasn't the frightened girl from the plantation. She was something beyond human, mythical, a force of nature channeling every ancestor's pain and triumph through her voice. Her first real performances were in small venues, rooms that held maybe 50 people. Many nights, fewer than 20 showed up. The few who did often came out of curiosity more than genuine interest. A black woman performing classical arias mixed with spirituals was unusual, almost scandalous. But slowly, word spread. There was something about her voice, her presence, that transcended prejudice for those willing to listen. She could make a room completely silent, every person hanging on each note. She could make them feel her rage, her sorrow, her defiance. A newspaper critic, a white man who attended one of her shows, almost by accident, wrote a review that changed her trajectory. He called her the most extraordinary vocalist he'd encountered in 20 years of covering music, comparing her to European opera legends, but noting she possessed something they lacked, a depth of feeling that came from lived suffering most could never comprehend. We're halfway through this remarkable story, and I hope you're as moved as I am by this journey. If you haven't already, please take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel, hit that like button and share this video, because stories like this deserve to be heard by everyone. These narratives of resistance and triumph need to reach as many people as possible. Thank you for your support. Now let's dive back into how her fame exploded and her plan for revenge began to take shape. The turning point came when a famous white abolitionist lecturer invited her to perform at a large rally in New York City. Thousands of people attended. She walked onto that stage knowing this was her moment, her chance to reach beyond the small circles of Philadelphia. She performed 3 songs. The first was a traditional spiritual that honored her mother and all who died in chains. The second was an operatic piece that showcased her technical mastery, proving she could compete with any European-trained singer. The third was something she composed herself, lyrics that explicitly called out the system of enslavement, naming the hypocrisies of a nation that claimed freedom while holding millions in bondage. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some wept. A few white attendees walked out in anger, but she didn't care. That performance was covered by newspapers across the Northeast. Within weeks, she was receiving offers from major venues, from concert halls that had never featured a black performer before. Success brought new enemies and old ones in different forms. Music industry managers and promoters saw profit in her, but they wanted to control her image, to make her more palatable to white audiences. They suggested she lighten her skin with powders, that she avoid political content, that she smile more and speak less about her past. One particularly odious manager told her that if she just focused on entertaining rather than agitating, she could become truly wealthy. She fired him on the spot, but the pressure was constant. There were always people trying to repackage her pain into something comfortable, to profit from her trauma while erasing the reasons she possessed such power in her voice. She learned to navigate this carefully, choosing partners who respected her vision while staying vigilant against exploitation. Her plan for revenge had been forming since the night she escaped. It wasn't about finding Edmund Caldwell and physically harming him, though rage certainly burned hot enough for that. No, she wanted something more permanent, more devastating. She wanted to destroy his legacy, to make sure the world knew exactly what the Caldwell fortune was built upon. She hired private investigators, paying them well to trace the Caldwell family's current status. Edmund had died, but his son, now middle-aged and respectable, had used the family wealth to enter politics. He was a congressman, speaking about economic development and states' rights, his entire career built on blood money that nobody questioned. She gathered documents, testimonies from other survivors, photographs of the plantation. She built a case not just against one family, but against the entire system they represented. But revenge consumed her in ways she didn't expect. Nightmares plagued her constantly. She would wake up screaming back on the plantation, feeling the whip, watching her mother die again and again. Success felt hollow some nights when she was alone in hotel rooms, famous but still fundamentally alone. Still carrying trauma that fame couldn't heal. She began to question whether exposing the Caldwells would bring peace or just perpetuate the cycle of pain. Her friends, other black artists and activists, were divided. Some urged her to let it go, to focus on building rather than destroying. Others insisted that justice required accountability, that men like Caldwell needed to be exposed or nothing would ever change. She wrestled with these questions, understanding that whatever she decided would define not just her revenge, but her legacy. 5 years after her escape, she returned to Mississippi, not in secret this time, but in triumph. She booked a performance in a concert hall in Jackson, the state capital, knowing the news would reach the Caldwell plantation. She sent a personal invitation to Congressman Caldwell, a letter dripping with irony, inviting him to see what had become of his family's former property. He came, unable to resist the curiosity, perhaps thinking she wouldn't dare acknowledge the connection publicly. The concert hall was packed, every seat filled, people standing in the aisles. She walked onto that stage in a gown that cost more than Caldwell used to pay for an entire family of enslaved people. She looked directly at him in the third row, and then she told her story. Every detail, the auction block, her mother's murder, the escape. She named him, named his father, named the plantation. She held up documents, read testimony, displayed photographs. The audience was stunned into silence, then erupted in chaos. Caldwell tried to leave, but journalists surrounded him, shouting questions. His political career was over by morning. But it wasn't just about one man. She used her platform to speak about the ongoing exploitation, the way former enslavers had become landlords, extracting rent from former enslaved people who had no land, no resources. She funded schools for black children. She supported legal challenges to discriminatory laws. She organized other artists to use their platforms for activism. Her shows became events where entertainment merged with education, where people came expecting beauty and left with consciousness raised. Some venues banned her. Some cities tried to prevent her from performing, but her fame was too great to fully suppress. For every door that closed, 2 more opened because people, black and white, wanted to hear her voice, wanted to witness her power. The cost was enormous. She received death threats regularly. Pro-enslavement newspapers ran vicious cartoons and articles attacking her character, calling her everything from a liar to worse. There were attempts to physically harm her, men who tried to attack her after shows, once even a poisoning attempt that nearly killed her. She had to travel with security, always looking over her shoulder, never fully safe despite her fame. Legal battles drained her financially as Caldwell's family sued her for defamation, though the cases were eventually dismissed when her evidence proved irrefutable. The stress aged her, gave her health problems, made her question whether the fight was worth the price. Some nights she wanted to disappear, to give up, to just exist without carrying the weight of representing all black pain and resistance. Yet she continued, because stopping would mean they won. Every performance was an act of defiance. Every song was proof that they couldn't break her. Her audiences grew more diverse, attracting people from all walks of life who were moved by her story and her artistry. Young black women saw in her a model of what was possible, that even from the worst circumstances, one could rise and claim power. White allies found in her a teacher, someone who made the abstraction of enslavement viscerally real in ways political speeches never could. Her influence spread internationally. She toured Europe, where audiences received her as an artistic genius while also learning about American racism. She met with abolitionists, writers, politicians, always pushing her message that freedom meant nothing without justice, that remembering meant nothing without action. The performance that defined her legacy happened at the 10th anniversary of her escape. She rented the largest theater in New York City, a venue that normally hosted only white performers. She created a show that was part concert, part theatrical experience, part historical documentation. The stage was designed to look like the plantation, then transformed throughout the performance into representations of freedom, showing the journey literally and metaphorically. She performed songs from every phase of her life, spirituals her mother taught her, classical pieces she'd mastered, original compositions that told her story. Between songs, she spoke directly to the audience, not as entertainer, but as witness, bearing testimony to what she and millions others had endured. The finale was a piece she composed specifically for this night, a musical and lyrical masterpiece that called for not just the end of enslavement, but for reparations, for land redistribution, for true equality. The audience rose in standing ovation that lasted 15 minutes. Critics called it the most important artistic event of the decade. That performance was documented, written about, discussed in churches and town halls across the country. It contributed to shifting public opinion, making abolition not just a political position, but a moral imperative that more people embraced. She received letters from people whose minds were changed, who hadn't understood the humanity of enslaved people until they heard her voice and her story. She also received letters from other survivors, people who found courage in her example to tell their own stories, to demand their own justice. A network formed around her, activists and artists who coordinated efforts, who supported each other's work, who built institutions that would outlast any individual. She invested her money into these causes, understanding that her fame was temporary, but the fight was permanent. As we near the end of this powerful story, I want to thank you for staying with us through this entire journey. If this has impacted you, if you believe these stories need to be told and shared widely, please make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Hit that like button and share this video with your friends, your family, anyone who needs to understand the depth of resilience and the power of using pain to create change. Your engagement helps us continue producing content that matters. Now, let's conclude this remarkable story. The question of whether her revenge brought peace is complex. She achieved what she set out to do, destroyed the Caldwell family's reputation, contributed to the broader movement that would eventually end legal enslavement, created art that would outlive her by generations. But the trauma never fully healed. She still had nightmares, she still flinched at certain sounds, she still carried the weight of her mother's death, of all the people she couldn't save. Revenge, she realized, was different from justice, and justice was different from healing. She had achieved aspects of all three, but none completely. What she did accomplish was transformation of her pain into something meaningful, something that helped others, something that forced a nation to confront its sins rather than hide from them. She lived to see the legal end of enslavement, though she understood that freedom on paper didn't equal freedom in reality. She continued performing into her 50s, her voice still powerful, even as her body weakened from years of stress and struggle. She wrote an autobiography that became a bestseller, providing her perspective in her own words rather than filtered through others' interpretations. She mentored young artists, passing on not just technical skills, but the understanding that art could be weapon and shield, that beauty and resistance weren't contradictory but complementary. She never married, never had children of her own, but considered all the young people she influenced her legacy, her descendants in spirit if not in blood. When she died at 57, thousands attended her funeral. Black and white, rich and poor, people whose lives she'd touched either directly or through her art. The newspapers that once attacked her now praised her as a pioneer, a genius, a hero. The irony wasn't lost on those who knew her story. How posthumous praise came easy, while living respect was fought for every day. But her impact was undeniable. Schools were named after her. Her songs were sung in churches and concert halls. Her story was taught, though often sanitized, made more comfortable for audiences who wanted inspiration without confronting the full brutality of what she survived and what she fought against. The lesson of her life isn't simple or comfortable. It's not that suffering makes you stronger, or that everything happens for a reason, or any of the platitudes people use to avoid confronting injustice. The lesson is that resistance is possible even from the most oppressed positions. That art can be a form of warfare. That memory is a duty. That telling the truth is an act of courage. That revenge and justice and healing are different things that sometimes overlap and sometimes conflict. Her story is about the cost of fighting back, the price of refusing to be broken, the reality that victory doesn't erase trauma, but can give it meaning beyond personal pain. What makes her story relevant today is that the systems she fought against evolved, but didn't disappear. The exploitation took new forms. The racism adapted to new contexts. The fight for dignity and equality continues in different venues with different methods, but the same fundamental struggle. Her example shows that one person can make a difference, not by being perfect or superhuman, but by refusing to accept oppression as inevitable, by using whatever tools and talents they possess to resist, by creating beauty out of ugliness, by demanding that the world remember what it wants to forget. She proved that the oppressed can become powerful, that victims can become victors, that those society tries to silence can make themselves heard in ways that echo through generations. Her voice, captured in scratchy recordings from the late 19th century, still moves people today. That sound, carrying the weight of her mother's spirituals and her own genius, reminds us that art transcends time when it speaks truth. Every note is a testament to survival. Every performance, an act of defiance. Every song, a prayer and a protest simultaneously. She took the worst thing that could happen to a human being and transformed it into something that would inspire millions. She took revenge, not through violence but through excellence, through refusing to let them define her, through becoming so undeniably great that they had to acknowledge her even as they hated what she represented. This is the story of how a mistreated and oppressed black individual, born into the nightmare of enslavement, decided that she would not die there, would not be forgotten there, would not let the system win. She became the most famous performer of her era, not despite her past, but because she refused to hide it, because she channeled every moment of suffering into art that shook the foundations of society. Her revenge was complex, costly, and incomplete. But it mattered. Her life mattered. Her voice mattered. And the fact that we're still telling her story more than a century later proves that she accomplished what she set out to do. She made sure they could never forget, never erase, never pretend that it didn't happen or didn't matter. She won not because she destroyed her enemies completely, but because she survived them, outlasted them, and became a legend while they became a cautionary tale. That is the ultimate revenge. To transform from victim to victor, from property to icon, from silenced to unforgettable. This was her gift to everyone who came after, the proof that it's possible to take the broken pieces of a shattered life and forge them into something beautiful and terrible and true. Thank you for listening to this story. Please remember to subscribe, like, and share this video so these important narratives continue to reach new audiences. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep fighting for justice.